Photoshop offers several tools and commands that provide different ways to retouch parts of a photo or even remove objects from a scene. The Content-Aware Fill command lets you remove objects by filling an area of a photo with other detail in the image. Let's check it out. Content-Aware Fill always begins with a selection of the area that you want to fill with surrounding image detail. In this image, I want to remove the photographer from the scene. You can use any of the selection tools to make the initial selection. I'm going to use the Object Selection tool because I know that it'll do a good job with this particular subject. With this tool active, I will drag to define a rectangular marquee around the object. And you can see that the tool has done an excellent job sensing what the object is and creating a selection of it. With the selection active, I'm going to go to the Edit menu and choose Content-Aware Fill. In the Content-Aware Fill workspace, the selected area is on the left and the area that's being sampled to create the fill shows as a green overlay. To the right of this is the preview of the result. And on the far right is the control panel with the sampling area options and the fill and output settings. I'm going to zoom up on the preview a little bit so we can see what's happening. There's an obvious dark fringe here, and the color inside the fill is not really matching the dune behind it. And this is because the initial selection was very precise, and some of those darker edge pixels along the shape of the photographer are being factored into the result. So we can fix that by coming over to the lasso tool in the Content-Aware Fill toolbar. And then up in the options, you can see that there are choices to expand or contract the selection. I'm going to leave this set to the default of 10 pixels, and I'll choose to expand the selection. And here you can see how that selection has been expanded to incorporate more of the detail around the subject. And in the preview pane, the result is greatly improved. The spot healing brush in Photoshop is ideal for retouching and removing imperfections from your photos, such as image sensor dust spots, small distractions, or objectionable elements like power lines. With the right approach, it can also be used to remove other types of objects from an image. Let's check this out. I'm going to begin this project by making a copy of the background layer by choosing Layer, New, Layer via Copy. And the reason that I'm making a copy layer is so that I can apply the retouching in a non-destructive way and have it be separate from the background layer. This will allow me to easily make corrections if some aspect of the retouching needs to be redone. I'm going to double-click on the Zoom tool at the bottom of the tool panel, which is a nice shortcut for zooming up to 100%, and then I'll press down on the spacebar to get the grabber hand, and I just want to arrange this so I can see all of the reflection of the Washington Monument. I'll come over and get the Spot Healing Brush tool. And up in the options bar for this tool, you can see that there are 3 types of healing that we can apply. Content Aware is the default, and this is what I tend to use most often. It's a good choice if you are repairing areas that contain an element of a pattern, such as the rippled surface of the water in this photo. Proximity match often works quite well if the surrounding areas are consistent in terms of color and detail. For now, I'm going to leave this set to Content Aware. And I'm going to resize my brush. You can see it here over the monument just above this goose. And I'm going to do that by using a shortcut of tapping on the right square bracket key several times to make the brush cursor larger. If I tapped on the left square bracket key, it would make it smaller. I'm going to remove this goose that is fast asleep here over the reflection. The healing brush in Photoshop offers more control than the spot healing brush because you can choose where to sample the image data from, which is often very important when you're removing objects from a scene. Let's check out how this tool works. In order to keep my retouching on a separate layer, I'm going to make a copy of the background layer by using the shortcut of Command-J on a Mac or Control-J on Windows. I'm also going to zoom in for a closer view by getting the Zoom tool and clicking a few times in the image just so I can see this man in the background a little bit better. I'm going to come to the toolbar and get the healing brush tool. And the first thing I'm going to do is make my brush size a bit smaller by tapping a couple of times on the left bracket key on the keyboard. Next, I'm going to define an area where I want Photoshop to copy detail from by holding down the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on Windows. And I'm just going to click on the edge between this brush area and the sandy colored hillside. Option or Alt click there, and then come over, line this up, and just start painting in there to remove that person. And it's doing a pretty good job. In some cases, the fact that that person was so much darker than the area around it might have caused some problems, but I'll show you how to address those when we remove the person in the foreground. So, apropos that, let me hold down the space bar to get the grabber hand, and let me move the image over so we can see that person in the foreground. And let me make the brush size a little bit larger for the healing brush tool. I'll tap on the right bracket key several times to get a bigger brush. And I'm going to hold down the Option key on Mac or the Alt key on Windows and sample from the path. Clicking there to sample on the path. Then I'll bring this over, line up the path, and start painting over the person. And here you can see how the color from the person's blue jeans is bleeding through into the area that's being retouched. The clone stamp in Photoshop is the tool to use when you need to copy existing detail as accurately as possible in order to remove something from an image. In this photo, we'll use this tool to remove one of the people in the crosswalk. So when you're doing retouching or object removal in Photoshop, it's always a good idea to keep your retouching on a separate layer so that the changes are non-destructive to the underlying image. So over here in the Layers panel, I'm going to come down to the bottom and click on the Create New Layer button to add a new empty layer above the background. And I'll double click in its name, and let's just rename this layer and call it Retouching. I'm also going to click on the Lock Position button for this layer, and this will prevent the retouching layer from accidentally being moved and becoming unaligned with the background layer. I'm going to come over to the toolbar and I'm going to select the Clone Stamp tool. Now, in order to clone detail from the underlying image onto the new empty retouching layer, I have to make sure that up here in the options bar for the Clone Stamp tool that the sample is set to current and below. The default setting for this tool is current layer, but that wouldn't work here because the current layer is empty and has no detail on it. So let me set that back to current and below. Next, I'm going to zoom up to 100% using the shortcut of Command-Option-0 on Mac or Control-Alt-0 on Windows. I'll hold down the space bar to get the grabber hand so I can move the image around and see this person here near the bottom of the crosswalk. I'm going to make my clone stamp brush cursor a bit larger by tapping on the right bracket key several times. And now I'm going to define a sample point. I'm going to tell Photoshop where I want it to copy the detail from. So I'm going to move my cursor a little ways over from the woman in the crosswalk there. And I'm going to hold down the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on Windows. And I'm going to line up that crosshair there with the edge of the white stripe. And with the Option or Alt key down, I'm going to click to define that as the sample point. The Patch tool in Photoshop has a lot in common with Content-Aware Fill and the Healing Brush. Let's see how we might use this tool to remove one of the horses in the background. I'm going to start off by making a copy of the background layer by choosing Command-J on the Mac or Control-J on Windows, and this is just so that I can keep the retouching from the Patch tool on a separate layer. Working with the Patch tool always starts with a selection of the area that you want to patch. You can use any of the selection tools to create this, or you can also use the Patch tool itself as a lasso for the first step. So let's come over here to the toolbar and choose the Patch tool. And what I'm going to do is drag a loose lasso selection with the Patch tool around this horse in the center background. Up in the options bar for the Patch tool, I have two different methods that I could use, normal or content aware. I'm going to leave this set to normal for now. And in normal mode, you can choose to patch either the source or the destination. Let's start off with the destination. And what destination refers to is where you drag these selected pixels. So essentially it's going to make a copy of these pixels and blend them in wherever you choose to move them. So let's drag this horse over to the right side here, and you can see that it's created a very convincing blend of moving that horse over there. I'm going to undo that by choosing Command Z or Control Z on Windows. And now let's set this to source. So what the source is referring to is what we started with, this selection here. And to create the patch, you drag this selection over to an area that has good detail. Let me drag it over here to the same area just because I have a lot of background detail over there.